Hello everyone, and welcome in for another Game of Thrones video. Game of Thrones has officially been on ice for over 5 months. Like most of you, I am highly disappointed in the way the series ended. It's still difficult to acknowledge the fact that the show ended in such a universally despised fashion. Despite this, one thing that I really did love about Season 8 was the score. I've been listening to the soundtrack ever since it came out. One of my favorite songs in the soundtrack is Flight of the Dragons. This song plays during the scene where Jon rode on Rhaegal for the first time, which is one of the better scenes from Season 8, in which just about all of our favorite characters were at their best and most powerful. This got me thinking, looking back in the timeline of the entire show, what was the biggest, most satisfying point of the series and where our characters were at their best? There are so many parts that are triumphantly rewarding. It's a big reason why we fell in love with the show in the first place, dating back to the capture of Jaime Lannister as the first major victory for the good guys.
By the time they knew what was happening, it had already happened.
Lady Stark, I'd offer you my sword, but I seem to have lost it.
When considering the highest point of the show, I'm not necessarily referring to any special effects or writing or anything like that. Simply the point in the timeline where our heroes were at their best. There are obviously many episodes in particular to choose from, but I'd say the first big one is the finale of Season 2. This episode is titled Valar Morghulis, and there are a lot of moving parts to this episode that kick off storylines that last throughout the run of the entire show. Theon gets captured by Ramsay, Robb breaks his oath by marrying Talisa, Daenerys overcomes her troubles in the House of the Undying, Arya and her friends escape Harrenhal, and Jon gains the trust of the wildlings to gain important intel for the Night's Watch. As I said, this episode is packed with major plot points, but I don't believe this is quite the show's highest point. It is a very good episode, one of the best. But the setback here is that our favorite characters were still relatively fresh to us. They hadn't quite dealt with all their hardships that would later groom them into the characters that we know now. The biggest example of this is Theon's brutal path to redemption. It was just beginning at that time. In this point of the story, Theon was pretty much hated by all fans, and we had no idea what to expect moving forward with him. I remember the first time I watched this episode when he was knocked out by Dagmar. I actually thought that might be the last we see of him, but in the end I'm very glad that it wasn't.
Thought he'd never shut up. It was a good speech.
Another big point in the series, and a huge fan favorite, is none other than Season 4's The Lion and the Rose. There's no way I could make a list like this without including the death of one of the most loathed little shits in about any fictional universe, King Joffrey. I think about 99% of fans of the show were literally jumping for joy when this happened, and rightfully so. Not only was Joffrey absolutely horrible for the entirety of his run on the show, but he truly went out with a bang. He was completely ruthless in his final minutes, specifically towards his uncle Tyrion. After watching Joffrey slash his gift to shreds, mocking him with his play with dwarves, making him be his cupbearer and pouring wine on him, I know that I had had it with his antics. The poisoning couldn't have happened at a more satisfying time. Other notable events in this episode include Bran figuring out where the Three-Eyed Raven is, and Sansa escaping King's Landing with Ser Dontos. While just about every one of our favorite characters win from Joffrey's death, the only real loser here is Stannis Baratheon, whether he knows it or not. Joffrey's death actually was a bad thing for Stannis due to the fact that Tommen was much more manipulatable than his older brother, and it actually strengthened the Lannister forces with Tywin technically gaining power in a more blatant way. Yet, this still isn't quite the series' highest point. We all know that at the end of the episode, Tyrion was blamed for poisoning Joffrey. This was straight up hard to watch. Tyrion had always been used by everybody and was treated like filth by his own family. He never could catch a break, and regicide was obviously a life-threatening accusation. Plus, fans were still reeling from the Red Wedding just a short 3 episodes prior, although this was a much-needed win for us at the time. Another huge episode, narrowly missing the top of the list, is Season 8's Winterfell. Yes, it was tough to include a Season 8 episode, but hear me out on this. Jon Snow just came off a huge victory for the upcoming fight against the dead by gaining the full Targaryen forces to his cause. On the other side of the coin, we have Daenerys, who added the Northern Kingdom to her claim to the throne after the battle. This episode also had reunions galore. Jon and Arya reuniting was something that we had been looking forward to for 67 episodes, and it was great to finally see it happen. We also had Bran and Jon, Samwell and Jon, and perhaps one of the best endings to an episode and a huge callback for the pilot episode, Jaime and Bran. This episode didn't top the list for any reason against it, but simply because it just couldn't outweigh the purely victorious sequence of events in Season 6 Battle of the Bastards.
Jon Snow came down from Castle Black with a Walden army and won the Battle of the Bastards. He's king of the North now.
Just wow. I'll never forget the hype for this episode. I'm pretty sure I didn't even want to sit down once after the opening sequence wrapped. Right from the start, the penultimate episode of Season 6 was legendary. Daenerys put the nail in the coffin in her long-lasting feud with the slavers of Slaver's Bay in stunning fashion. On top of this, she locked down an allegiance with the Greyjoy fleet. Things were looking up for her better than ever. In Westeros, we of course had the literal Battle of the Bastards. We saw thousands of Northmen die in the bloodbath on the fields of Winterfell. It was gut-wrenching to watch, especially when the last of our favorite characters were seconds away from death. That's when we heard that fateful horn blast from the Knights of the Vale. Sansa surprised everyone on that field with the arrival of the unstoppable cavalry. With his forces wiped out, Ramsay was prepared to hold Winterfell for a long-lasting siege. But thanks to one final gracious act from everyone's favorite giant, One, he breached the castle gates, which allowed the Starks to pour into their old ancestral home. The next couple of scenes were arguably the most rewarding in all of Game of Thrones. Jon had enough of Ramsay, and so did we. After all of his mind games and disgusting acts against his victims, it was time for him to get a taste of his own medicine. Jon blocked 3 arrows, slammed Ramsay into the mud, and nearly beat him to death with 21 rage-fueled punches to the face. He only stopped when he realized that Ramsay was not his to kill. Ramsay awoke in the dog kennel, only to find out that he was the next meal for his mistreated hounds. Sansa watched as the dogs pounced and walked away with a smile on her face as Ramsay was being torn to pieces in the background. This episode is the closest thing that we will ever see to perfection on a fantasy show. It is a true masterpiece. It won a record 6 Emmy Awards for good reason. As far as the storyline and the characters are concerned, I truly believe that this was their finest hour. All of them had gone through such tribulation for years, especially Sansa, and now all of them have their biggest victories to date. It was most likely the best times of their adult lives. Not to mention, Arya killed Walder Frey and exterminated the Frey house right around the same time as these events. So this really was a triumphant time period for our favorites. Do you think that Battle of the Bastards was the highest point for our fan favorites? Or was there a different time that you think outweighs this episode? I'd love to see your opinions in the comments below. Thank you for watching another video. I put a lot of thought into this one, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next episode.